For almost half of his life, it was spent on the tatami, a type of flooring synonymous with Japanese culture.
Borre. My name is Borre Akkersdijk.
This large part of Borre's life came down to his love of Judo, a form of Japanese martial art that dates back to 1882. It was then that Judo founder Jigoro Kano introduced it as an exercise in physical, mental, and moral development. Judo's path to becoming an Olympic sport began centuries earlier through jiu-jitsu, and before that, the ancient Japanese form of wrestling known widely as sumo. In 1889, Kano took a trip to introduce the sport to the rest of the world, starting with Europe. A story that would go down in folklore included Kano utilizing a judo technique to throw somebody taunting him before gracefully protecting his opponent's head from impact. This was a great representation of how, despite judo's effectiveness, it also considered one's opposition. In 1964, Judo was officially recognized as an Olympic sport and one with global relevance. In Borre's native country of the Netherlands, he was deep into the sport from the age of 5 and onwards till the age of 20. The tatami and dojo, or training hall, were a place of sanctuary. Borre would compete with some of the Netherlands' best fighters before ultimately choosing a life outside of judo, but not without a real influence on his life beyond the sport that translated into fashion and design.
I was a little kid. My parents split up when I was around 4 or 5. I moved to the city where my grandparents lived, and the colleague of my mom was a judo teacher. And he knew me since I was born. And I was always fighting with him. He said when we moved to my hometown, Nijmegen, he said like, hey, maybe you should pass by. He's old enough to start judo. As he always wants to wrestle and he always wants to play with other kids. So 5 years old was the first moment that I walked on the tatami and started my, I won't say career in judo, but it was a beginning of something that took more than half of my life.
The early sessions around judo quickly proved to be invaluable. Each day, Borre would rush home after school to get his judoki, otherwise known as a traditional judo uniform. His learnings in judo weren't just about a sport. It was about developing an understanding of himself in more ways than one.
I never really had a dad due to that they split up. My dad just left. And for me, René was like, that was my judo coach, and he was a sort of dad for me. So coming to judo was always, I was learning there about respect, about how to speak to other kids. Also learning about my own body. I think that was really important to take away the energy. And it was just the after school go-to. My mom was working, so after school I went to my grandma's, got my judo gear, and then I went to judo. So a big part from that was like my friends were at judo.
A generation of parenting has promoted uniqueness among children without a dosage of life's sometimes hard reality. There are in fact winners and there are losers in life, and not everybody can come away with a trophy for simply participating. This concept was drilled into Borre's head very early on.
You have to do it yourself. You cannot rely on the team. And that was always interesting. It made me, when I was even really young already, you have disappointments quite early. So I'm not really sure if, I can remember a lot of the tournaments I had when I was a kid, winning and losing.
Losing is something that occurs quite frequently in sport, and Borre's own experience were no different. He recalls one moment his mother always talks about.
There's always one story that my mom always told me. It was one of the first tournaments she went with us. And she didn't often do that, especially not later on, because I went to tournaments every weekend. But especially in the beginning, I was a little kid, I was quite heavy for my age. Sat there for hours on the side, and then my name got called, walked on to the tatami, I took a bow to my opponent, walked on, and my opponent was bigger and older. Took 5 seconds, threw me off the tatami, lost the game. I bowed again and sat down for another half an hour waiting for the next fight. That happened 3 times and then I was finished.
Rather than dwell on his position of inferiority, Borre had a remarkably mature approach to losing. It had all the makings of resilience and understanding what it means to pick yourself up at a very young age.
That was part of it. I don't remember it at all as a sad thing. It was just you tried your best, and then getting older, I find it more difficult probably sometimes to lose. Especially if I look back at it now, I think I learned a lot from it at a really young age, that things go wrong sometimes. Or that not everything is going always how you want it to go.
In addition to the whole experience of winning and losing, Borre was continually challenged day in and day out. And there was a sense of belief, seeing his friends and teammates compete at a high level and all the amazing results they achieved. It solidified that there was a path to success, but it was never to be an easy one.
I think along the way, I always looked up to people and I realized you can get there as long as you work for it really hard. That I had from really young, because I saw everybody training their asses off.
Judo's ability to motivate Borre was undeniable. It did, however, introduce some character traits that he looks back on philosophically. He began to question the individuality of the sport and the way of life for many great athletes around him. You were overly dependent on oneself to achieve greatness, which outside the confines of the tatami isn't always applicable. Having a solid team around you amplifies your abilities to achieve a goal in a professional workplace. Many Olympic athletes share the same sentiments. After the Games' official closing ceremony, and when people are no longer tuned in, athletes are often left searching for a sense of identity.
As good as it is that you learn to fail, learn to lose, learn to get up really quickly, learn to do it over and try over again, I think that's amazing. I think a sport that you do by yourself makes you really egocentric. In that sense, it is all about you. It's about how do I eat, how do I train, how do I sleep, it's I. In that sense, the moment I stopped to see that I cannot do everything by myself, even that an art school is also really egocentric because you're making the choice to do things by yourself.
Not for a second did Borre look back with a sense of regret. Many of his teammates were older, sometimes 6 to 7 years older, and they were exceptional practitioners of judo who would go on to be champions in their own regard. Borre never quite achieved those same standards, and in his late teens, he needed to make a real decision about his future.
They were all national champions. So actually from a really young age, I was always training with kids that were way better than me. And I always had to push the boundaries for myself. I learned a lot on the fact that I wasn't the best. But the only way how I could change that was train and train and train and train. I also realized at a certain point I also made the choice. Hey, I didn't make it. I wasn't good enough. I would describe it as a suit jacket that is super strong with no extra attachments, so no buttons, no loose collar, but the collar is attached to it. And then with a belt around it instead of the buttons to close it. The material is so strong that it's unable to be ripped. And white pants that are a bit high above the ankle that also are super strong and able to be ripped. And there's no buttons, but the only way how to close them is with ropes that are inside, I think. And it's white. White with a belt that has a collar to just give you the degree of how good somebody is or how long they have been training. It doesn't matter how good they are then. And in general, it is a white suit, but in competitions, it can also be a blue one.
That's Borre describing a traditional judo gi. The influence of judo was never quite apparent or defined for Borre. When quizzed about the intersection, he's quick to admit that he never quite looked at it from the perspective of changing or influencing his life. That is in many ways the beauty of sport. It exists as a moment in time, defined by minutes or seconds with a clock, but it's much more far-reaching and influential than many give it credit for.
When we spoke about influence of judo, I was thinking about that I was wearing the same suit for 15 years. Of course, sometimes I bought a new one, but it was the one suit that you wore with your belt. And it was functional. It worked, it didn't rip. It was the shape that you needed to have and that you got. And when I think about my work now, I don't have a lot of aesthetical details that are not functional. Like sometimes within the material, but it is due to the technique we use. And it's not an extra that we give it. I do see a lot of similarities.
After Borre's own bit of introspection, the idea of interconnectivity between judo and design begins to surface. The traditional uniform factored into his own design language. United by simplicity and functionality, there's a common narrative that begins to reveal itself.
The judo suit is really simple too, and I think my pieces were too. It's not about being a crazy pattern designer or a pattern cutter. We always use the base shapes, and due to the dialogue with the machine, changing it in the computer, sizes always got scaled up. It was a lot of these things we never designed in the beginning. The shapes of the first cape and the first jumpsuit, they got way bigger than in first hand we designed them. That was all due to the process and working on it, and things just happened too. But definitely the looks of an easy piece where the material makes it special, that's in a functional suit like judo. And I think that's also, a judo suit is really, really strong and it's really heavy. And that comes back also in our materials now.
For the first time, Borre took to Paris during Fashion Week, but not as an observer, but an active participant. He brought a mobile showroom that could traverse the city in the form of a van, allowing his brand Byborre to go to the people. The launch of his new line brought back some feelings Borre hadn't experienced in some time.
It's actually a good moment to do this talk, as I just came back from Paris. And this was the first time in quite a while that I was really nervous. I went to Paris, we did everything we could do, but there it was not only up to us, it was also up to other people what they thought of it, up to buyers if they wanted to buy into it, up to the city if we could drive our mobile showroom there. They were all facts that I could not control anymore. And that feeling was for the first time a bit the same. I even said it to a few people. It's like, hey, this feels a bit like I'm at a competition again and I have to do my fights. And that was really funny. I think because we had this talk right before, probably triggered something in me. It had a bit of the same feeling.
This foundation in judo was a crucial part of Borre's development as a person. But now that judo's gone and he's in a new role, what does it mean for him going forward?
I looked at it as different chapters. It's so much part of me. Like you have to understand that I did judo from my 5th until my 20th. That's 15 years. After that, I started studying. I went to Eindhoven. I was 21 or something. I'm 31 now, so my whole career with my studies including is 10 to 11 years right now. So my judo was a way bigger part of my life. So it's me just as much as my work. What I'm doing now is me. I don't turn my work off. I'm not leaving the studio and say like, okay, let's go on tomorrow. No, I walk outside and I keep on thinking and I'm at home and everything is part of it.
Just as judo was once a focus of his life, the subject matter has now shifted. Borre has been keen to implement that clear-cut precision required in judo towards his interest in textile innovation and fashion design.
At this point, for sure, we're textile innovators. That's what the studio is focused on. And from that textile innovation, we are focusing on the brand. bringing out a core collection that will run in generations. I think I would always explain it like that. Next to that, it's on the textile side, the innovation side, we use that knowledge for consultancy. And we use that knowledge also to work together and for other brands. And that's a really simple reason, it's to sell your knowledge. We're now at the stage that we are a professional company. That's not only about me, but about the whole team.
The pronounced difference of being more team-oriented is among some key traits that are also starting to take shape in other areas of Byborre. A certain swagger and philosophy, things that can't necessarily be felt, are all part of Byborre's equation. In many ways, they are traits that defined him in judo, where it was rarely about sheer size or strength. It was a combination of things that paved the way towards a victorious outcome.
I think it's quite clear what they come for. In the first place, I think they see a group of kids that bring certain aesthetic value to textile with textile innovations. So to say that in short, I think the brands really come for our whole production process. So from the yarn to the product. And that always has a really aesthetical value to it.
Post-Judo Borre is one that recognizes that need for a great team to push things even further. It took time away from the sport to recognize that one person alone can only do so much.
I think I can push it further. With judo, I realized that I always had to do everything myself, where now I realize I can ask a lot of people around me. It has the same feeling, but back in the days, that stopped with me. My qualities, my training, my abilities to do something. And now it actually starts at that point when I stop, because then I look at what can other people do. So in that sense, more of maybe a team sport. I still have that urge to push boundaries, and I think I also try to push other people as far as I can go.
There's a clear and methodical approach to Borre's mind. There's always a certain level of calculation and thought in many of his steps. Early into Byborre's brand development, a simple item, a scarf, would become a big part of the people's interest in the brand. But it was meant to be an introduction, and by no means something to define the whole movement. Now, the fact that Borre never quite made it to the top in judo doesn't mean he didn't have the necessary understanding of what it took to be the best. Borre's coach once told him he had wished that Borre had succeeded, won, and gone to the next level. But for Borre, there are no regrets. He always knew there was something else he would strive to be the world's best at. Textile innovation.
Sometimes when I think back about my judo, I always thought, wow, I wish I had the strength that I have now. I gave up sometimes at points that I just had to push on a little bit further. Where now I just push. There is no giving up. There is no, I'm not gonna make it or it's not gonna work. I'm gonna give it my all, always. But I think that was also a reaction because I even got quite close with judo but as I never pushed the boundaries to my fullest, I didn't make it. So I think now if I look at how I work, not making it is not an option.